A great Al-Anon speaker for you, all the way from Chicago, Illinois. I give you Dawn.
My name is Dawn, and I am a slowly recovering member of Al-Anon. And I am so grateful to be here. The reason I'm so slow is that life keeps changing. You know, one moment I was talking and I was young. And not so long ago, I had an accident and I was talking to my doctor and I was planning all my life experiences ahead of me. And she looked at me and she said, "You're old now." I'm not used to people telling me that, you know? And it's dealing with the reality. I just came from a workshop on acceptance. Acceptance is the key. I'm old, okay? Can't do what I used to do. But there's no but, because when I say but, that means I erase the whole thing I said before. But there's and. I can't get it up here, you know? There's a lot of life left. That's the good news, you know. I was so thrilled last night. First, to be asked to come and talk anywhere. I'm always amazed by that, because I was in this program for about 16 years before anybody ever asked me to speak. I don't understand that, because I had so much wisdom. I had such depth. I had such ability to share. I had so many ways that I could not only fix you, but my husband and my children and everybody else, and they never asked me to speak. But they kept saying, and this is how I knew they knew and wanted my wisdom, they kept saying, "Dawn, you keep coming back." Anyway, I am grateful to be here, you know. And I was so excited last night to hear Jack and to have dinner last night with David and Mary and Beth. And, well, it was almost dinner, but we were close to dinner. We never got our food, and when it did finally come, it was terrible. And, you know, I also have a compulsive eater. If I'm going to eat a meal, I want it to be good, you know. And I was willing to say, forget it, you know. I will wait. Now, you know it had to be some bad food, right? But they were doing the best they can. I'm talking through a spiritual eye now, but it wasn't good enough. As I used to say to my husband, he'd say, "I'm doing the best I can." And I said, "But that's not quite good enough. But I know you're doing the best you can." You know, and to hear Paul this afternoon, and I had to look, because I'm at the age now I forget names, you know. I forget my name. I call my children every one of their names before I get the right one. And my mama used to do that, and I say, boy, that is really sad, isn't it? She doesn't even know us. And now I'm doing it, you know. And the other thing that I really am amazed at, I mess up words. And my children, I see them all kind of look at one another, like give one another, "What did you say her name was, Mama?" And nobody laughs, but I say, whatever I said, "Mrs. Brown," they all laugh. "It's Mrs. Black," you know. But I know it's a color, you know, so I'm in the same ballpark, you know. I've been praying today, said, "Lord, where do I start? It's been a long journey, you know." And I used to like to start when I met the alcoholic, because it made me look good from the beginning, you know. I just, you know, and then I could make him look so bad, you know. I remember one time we spoke at a retreat, Peter and I, and a woman came up to me and said, "I am so glad that you got rid of that terrible husband." And Peter was sitting there. He said, "No, I'm the same one." I said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you he changed, you know." But some years ago, we took our youngest child to be psychoanalyzed. He was about 9. He was having some problems getting his life together. 9 years old. And the psychiatrist wanted to talk to Peter and myself. And I went in with my self-righteous look, you know, like, wait till she hears about him. And she said, "I wanted to know on a scale of 1 to 10 what kind of parenting you each received." And Peter said, "I received a 0 or a 1. And she looked at me and I said, "I received an 8 or a 9. And she said, you're the problem. No one who received an 8 or 9 would marry someone who received a 0 or a 1. So here's the problem. I have on every mirror in my house, you are looking at the problem. Just in case I forget and I want to say they did this or they made me feel this way. Nobody makes me feel this way. If I make a decision to feel badly or to be hurt, that's my choice. I can also make a decision to bless them and let them go. You know, that's the good news of recovery in these rooms. I was born in a parsonage, and if there's any other preachers' kids, we'll talk in the corner. I love being born in a parsonage. I hadn't much choice. My mother and father at that point couldn't afford a hospital. I was the last of 8 children, and my father pastored this little church in Flint, Michigan, and I was the last of their children, and I really do believe they had been trying until they could reach perfection. My father would build a church, and my mother would have a baby. And my father would build a church, and my mother would have a baby. And by the time they got to Flint, he bought a church, and it was over, you know. And so I'm the last coming in this family of extraordinary people. There was no alcohol in my home. My home was very sane. Now, there was no alcohol, but we all ate compulsively. I mean, you have never seen a family eat like my family. I mean, you would open the refrigerator and a ham would fall out, you know. We would get up at 12 midnight and my dad would say, let's have Thanksgiving dinner. You know, I loved it, you know. And at church, we'd have these great big celebrations, you know. And after the service was over, we'd all go down in the basement and eat ourselves into a stupor, you know. I can remember my brother rolling on the floor saying, I've had enough. But as soon as I burp, I'll be okay again. But nobody got fat in that family but me. But we were a family of we used food to calm whatever it was, the emotion that was going on in our lives. And my mother and father, who were very busy doing God's work, we moved to Detroit, Michigan when I was a year and a half, and my grandfather moved with us, and he took care of me. My grandfather sexually abused me. And I grew up with this feeling of being different and dirty. I bet I've joined church 100 times. I would come down the aisle with tears coming down my eyes and getting on my knees and asking God to please clean me up. Stop the hurt that's going on. There's something different about me than my brothers and sisters, something different about me than my friends. And I always had this feeling of not being clean enough. My mother used to say she'll wash the skin off her because I would take baths all the time trying to get clean. And Grandpa did what he did. I had this rage and anger in me for years towards my grandfather. And one day my sponsor said to me, how old was your grandfather when he sexually abused you? And I said, I don't know. I think he must have been at least 90. And she said, what was his life like? And I said, he was a slave. He had been brutalized much of his life. He had welts on his back from where he had been whipped as a boy. My grandfather, by the time he brutalized me, was sexually sick himself. I bore the scars, but I carried the pain years later until my sponsor helped me to look at him through a spiritual eye and get rid of that terrible burden. But I carried this with me. I was a disappointment to my parents. My parents had brilliant children. I'm not brilliant. My parents had gifted children. I'm not gifted. My brothers and sisters, who I idolized, were nutty as fruitcakes. I just thought they were wonderful. My oldest brother wanted to be an actor, but you can't be an actor if you're born in a parsonage, you know. So he did the next best thing. He studied for the ministry. My next brother wanted to be a jazz player, but you can't be a jazz player in the parsonage, you know. So he learned to play hymns and gospel music and that kind of music until Dad left the house, and then we'd go into the jazz and entertainment. We all played like we were somebody different. Then I had this oldest sister who was my role model. I wanted to be like, the reason I wanted to be like her was because, first place, she was thin, and she was beautiful, and she was gifted, and she was schizophrenic. Now, I don't know quite how to imitate a schizophrenic person, but I did the best I could. I remember the night before she got married, she took all the luggage and threw it down on her husband-to-be's head, and I thought that was so romantic. I said, now, when I grow up and have a husband, I'm going to try to treat him just like that. Too bad Peter didn't see that scene before he asked me to marry him. Then I had this other sister who did nothing but sit in a rocking chair and rock and take care of the younger children after Grandpa died. And these were my role models. Mama lost 3 children. 3 children died before I was born. And my mother was a very distant person. She used to say, I don't really like children. But when you're Methodist, there's limited to what you can do. They couldn't play cards and they couldn't dance. They couldn't go to movies. And so Mom and Daddy had babies. So we had this. And by this time, we'd moved to Detroit, and my father had a church that started at 300 members, and my father's church, by the time I was 6 or 7, had at least 6,000 members. It was a dynamic church, and my father was a dynamic preacher. And I loved my father's preaching, and he allowed me. They used to tell the ushers of the church, don't let her repent another Sunday. Keep her in the back. And I was a drama queen from the beginning. My mother made me this outfit with a cape because I was fat, and I wore this cape and had a red lining. And African Methodist people can shout in the church. You all don't do that, you know. And I would raise my arms like this with this red cape at the back, you know, and use the hallelujah, you know. And I'd come down the aisle with tears coming down my eyes. And my dad said, oh, you don't need a shield. Sit her down. Not again. She's not going to repent again. But he didn't understand. He didn't understand that underneath all that drama was this little girl who was in pain, who felt different. You know. We grew up in that church, and my father became a bishop in the church. And that meant we had to leave that congregation. They were really my family, my extended family, and they were really nice to me, except they used to tell my mother, you have the worst children I have ever seen. And my mother would say, they're not bad, they're just mischievous. And Mama would say, why would you say they're bad? And they said, well, they've got the janitor of the church locked in a telephone booth in the basement, you know. They have torn up whatever part of the altar they have, and there was a whole list of things that we had done. Mama said they're just so mischievous. Mama was tired, you know. By the time I came along, my brothers got spankings and stuff like that. I remember my mother just didn't do anything where I was concerned. She was just tired. She was just, you know, like, oh well. And I understand now that I didn't understand why it was hard for her to be close to us, because she had suffered this loss. And she never could get just close to children and hug them. I don't remember them ever hugging. Now, I say all this, but I don't want you to think any of my problems. Certainly, nobody gave them a manual on how to raise children. They gave them a Bible on how to preach in the church, but they didn't give them a manual on how to have children. And they did the best they could, and they really did. What they did was feed us. And that was a big job, just taking care of our food needs. And my mother tried very hard to make me look nice, but I kept busting out of clothes because I kept getting bigger and bigger. And every time Mama would come to some point where I looked nice in a dress, by the time she made it for me and put it on me, it didn't fit anymore because I just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And my brothers and sisters went off to college, and I was glad they went because I always wanted to be an only child. And so they went off to college, and I discovered I could sing, and this was going to be my way out. All of my brothers and sisters sing very well. They have beautiful voices. And I had a beautiful voice. Now, I can't do now because I had surgery on my vocal cords. And for a long while, I couldn't speak. My husband was so relieved. I couldn't say much of anything, you know. But my voice came back, so at least I could talk. But I was singing in this choir, and I would get the solos in this choir, and this choir director paid attention to me. Now, that was important because I was this grossly obese kid that nobody paid any attention to. Never been on a date, never had any of that kind of social reaction or with people. And I went singing at this congregation one Sunday, and on the way home from church, choir director gave me a ride, and he took advantage of me. Now, I couldn't go home and say to my mother and father that something happened on the way home because Mama said, don't get in people's cars. Mama said that's dangerous, especially don't get in older men's cars. But I did it anyway. And that summer we went to Europe, my mother, my father, my sister, and I. And I knew something was wrong when we were on the ship, but I didn't know what was going on. And we got back home, and I really knew something was wrong because I'd been sick. And 10 months later, I was standing at Women's Hospital, and I said, I've been in labor for 2 days. I don't have a doctor. I don't know what to do. And a man was standing next to me, and he said, I don't know who she is, but I'll take care of her. And I delivered a 10-pound, 4-ounce baby boy. And he had all his fingers and all his toes, and he was perfect. And I, who had been this child who wanted to be the only child and who felt left out by my mom and dad, had this great sense of now I have somebody in my life, and I'm going to really be wonderful where she's concerned, this child is concerned. I'm going to take care of him. I'm going to love him. I'm going to nurture him. And someone had to call my parents, and my parents were in total shock. They couldn't understand. All they knew was I got fat, but they didn't know anything was wrong with me. And my father, who was a bishop in the church, said nothing like this happens in our family, and they rushed down to Women's Hospital in Detroit. And my father came into the room, and he said, it's going to be all right. And I felt this great sigh of relief. It's going to be all right. And they had this baby in my arms. And I know I was sick then because I was so grateful. You know, and we got in the car coming home from the hospital. And we got to the stoplight, and a woman opened the door of the car and snatched the baby from my arms and closed the door of the car, and we drove on. And I remember screaming, and I remember crying, and I remember not understanding, what are you doing? And my father said, get yourself together. My father said, it will be all right. My father said, go back to school, make something of your life. Put this in behind you and just keep on doing, just become something. And I would go from church to church looking for this little boy. I would look everywhere. I would pull blankets. I would scream at night. And one day I looked in the mirror and I said, well, you know what's wrong with me? Had nothing to do with the fact that I had a bad disposition, had nothing to do that I was full of fear, had nothing to do with the abuse issue, had nothing to do with any of those things. What was wrong with me was I was fat. I'm going to fix the outside of me. So if I fix the outside of me, then everything's going to be just right. And so I found a diet doctor in Detroit, Michigan, Dr. Weinstein. Imagine he's dead by now. And he gave me shots and pills. I probably should have qualified for another program. And for a solid year, I took those shots and those pills. And something happened. I was the child who, by the time I came along and was of any age, my brothers and sisters had assignments to do in the house. I never had to do anything. Never. My mother and father had help by the time I came along. And so I was just there, you know. So here I am now. I lost this weight, and I didn't know what to do with myself. All at once, this grossly obese young woman had turned into a stone fox. I mean, I was looking good. I mean, I looked so good that my brothers would bring friends home, and they say, man, what happened to your sister? You know, and I wouldn't wear my glasses, so I couldn't see anybody anyway, but I looked so good that summer, and I knew it wasn't going to last long, okay, because food was looming over here calling my name. So these guys that kept coming now to visit me, who would never have even looked at me before, were now falling all over themselves, and these pills had made me crazy anyhow. I had energy, I this person who would rather go to sleep than be active. I was walking, I was doing exercises, I was vibrant, I was dancing, and I cannot dance. The rule that black people have rhythm goes out the window when it comes to me. I was dancing, I was doing all kind of stuff, and these young fellas fell in love with me. Well, they fell in love with the outside of me. This one guy worked for the government, and he said, "I love you. Will you marry me?" And we were dating, and I said yes. Then there was this other man who was pastoring a church in Pontiac, and he said, "I've fallen in love with you." And he said, "Will you marry me?" And I said yes. You don't understand, food was looming over here. I had to get this done quick, right? Then there was this young man who had just gotten out of the service. He was just a little bit spacey. He talked Martian. He was debonair and romantic. Romantic is that he was not in touch with reality. He said things to me like, well, we always rode the bus because he didn't have a car. One other thing he didn't have, which made life very exciting, he had a lot of time that he could just shower on me because the other guys had to go to work. Well, he didn't have anything like that to interfere with his courting life, So he would say things to me like, I'm an alcoholic. And I said, "Isn't that romantic? Wow, your great writers are alcoholics. This is really something." And he was we went to jazz clubs. I'd never been to a jazz club. We went to bars. I'd never been at a bar. This was so exciting. We could spend the whole day walking. I thought he was walking because he wanted to be with me. He didn't have any more money. So we would walk the streets of Detroit. We just had a great time. And then one day we were standing at the bus stop, and he looked at me and he said to me these words. He said, "Dawn, I need you." It was like vibration. It went, he needs me, he needs me, he needs me. So who do you think I married? I did call the other two fellas the day after we eloped. And in life since then, I have made amends to them. But my brothers said they don't know how lucky they were. They do not know how lucky they were. I had a mission. I didn't have to look at any of my life. I didn't have to look at my negative behavior. I didn't have to look at my losing my son. I didn't have to look at grandpa's sexual stuff. I didn't have to look at all that. I had a purpose. I had this man who was an alcoholic, and when I got through fixing him, he was going to stand in some corner somewhere, and he was going to point and say, I owe it all to her because she put my life together. Now you can't beat that for a gratitude thing. He was going to be so grateful to me. And something happened that was very depressing. When he was a young man, and in the service in Georgia, he had been sentenced to AA. And he was in Georgia, and they wouldn't let him in the meeting because he was African American. And they couldn't keep him out because the traditions had just passed. So they put a chair in the doorway, and he had to sit there, and he had this anger towards this program because of the humiliation he felt. But he had to go because his officer had said that's what you must do. So in our early married life, after our first child was born, and he left me at the hospital and forgot, and he did something else that was very interesting. This is one of the things that I've had to look at through a spiritual eye and take my part. When I was in the hospital and I called home, And because I was been there 3 days, they don't do that anymore. They keep you for a while. And he wasn't there, but a woman answered the phone. And I had this feeling, okay, he's brought somebody else in my house, in my bed. I'm in the hospital having his child. I am so full of anger and rage. So I should get out of this marriage right now. Why should I stay in a marriage with someone who's going to be unfaithful to me, who's not going to do this and do that? And so when he finally showed up, what do you think I said? Nothing. Nothing. Because my self-esteem was so low, I thought maybe that's what I deserved, you know. And so he went to AA, because he called AA one night after being out on one of his drunks. And AA sent two, God has a sense of humor, because you remember Detroit, Michigan, God sent two white guys to our house to take Peter to a meeting, you know. And Peter, he was so hungover. He'd been out and he had one pair of pants and they were standing in the corner, because he had this quaint little habit when he drank, he wet his pants. And they used to call him Pissy Pete in the Army. And the guy said, do you want to go to a meeting? Peter said, I can't. I only have one pair of pants, and they're standing in the corner over there. And he said, if you want to be sober more than you want to drink, you will go to a meeting with us. And they took Peter to the meeting. And I sat there in that little apartment. We had a one-room apartment where the bed falls out of the wall. And I cried and cried and cried, because I wanted to know who was going to come and rescue me. And then I lost Peter, because he was going to a meeting every night. He was Mr. AA. He did the first step and the 12th step. And he said the other steps were for lesser people than he. He was working that program. He lost his car on the last drunk, so we were walking again. But he was Mr. AA. He was paying people's rent, and we were ready to be evicted. The only reason we weren't going to be evicted because my dad owned the building. Other than that, they would have kicked us on the street. But he was saving the world. So I knew what I was going to do. See, here's what he did. He would go to his Tuesday night meeting, and he'd leave at 7 o'clock, and he didn't get home till midnight. And I remember a woman had been in my house, so I knew something was going on, right? So I decided that I would go to Al-Anon. And I went out the old Han and Y. It was in November of 1958. Can you imagine that? November 1958. I was 26 years old. Oh, I am old. I went out there, and after about, I guess 6 or 7 meetings, I understood the whole program. And came back and started my own group, a friend of mine and myself, at the East Ferry Group in Detroit, Michigan. And the thing that was good about this woman said to me, what we should do is you should ride in the back of my car, and I'll put a blanket over you. And then you can watch and see if your husband's fooling around with any people, because we just happened to start the meeting at the same place his meeting was. Wasn't that a coincidence? And what happened was, this woman was so wise that I asked her, would she be my sponsor? We both had a very slow recovery. Slow recovery. Her husband was as nutty as my husband. They were young. We didn't have the literature we had now. They had this little yellow book that they followed. We had this little blue book that we used in Al-Anon. We didn't have all this great literature. I read the big book and underlined all the places where Peter needed help. And I would try to teach him. I tried so hard to teach him and to train him how to become the husband that I thought he should be. And I worked so hard with that man. And oftentimes, right in the middle of my lecturing to him, he'd fall asleep. And it was just so depressing, you know. And I was consumed with him. You know, the alcoholic may be consumed with alcohol, but I was consumed with Peter. He was my mission in life. I had to fix him. And then we brought other children into this relationship. I mean, we had a war going constantly. He drank at me and I ate at him. I mean, it was just insanity in that home. And I can see the kids hiding in the closet, watching us and trying to figure out what's going on. And then they come down in the morning and they say, how are you, Mom? And I say, fine. They say, didn't we hear you and Daddy? Oh, no. We love one another dearly. And they look confused. If that's love, no wonder they're not married. You know what I'm saying? That's what I gave them as little kids growing up. This total dysfunctional relationship, so full of anger and pain. And then one year, my middle child, by this time, Peter, who when I married him was a janitor, and he had finally gotten a job. And I remember one of my boyfriends said, he won't be a janitor long, married to you. Because he's gonna have to work hard in order to provide some of your needs. What they didn't know was I have never been interested in things. I had things growing up. What I was interested in was capturing him. I wanted all of him. And he decided, instead of giving me all of him, he became a successful man. I said, oh my goodness, he was directing one of the first HMOs in this country. And he didn't have a college degree at that point. This was in Albany, New York. He was a miracle worker. And then we were living in upstate New York, and my kids have been Methodists, they've been Baptists, they've been African Methodists, they've been Presbyterian, they've been Lutheran, they've been Episcopalian, they've been Catholic, they've been Church of God in Christ, they've been Church of God, they've been Lutheran, they've been Missouri Synod. Every place I was going, we were trying to find God and get deeper levels so I could fill the hole. And I was getting bigger and bigger. And Peter said he left this attractive wife, and he came home one day, and this grossly obese woman was standing at the door. And he didn't understand. You see, when you don't love yourself, you have to find somebody who will love you just as you are. And as I envisioned myself was this grossly obese woman. And he had to love me like that. And I'd ask him questions like, do I look fat in this dress? Well, I was weighing 110 pounds more than I weigh today. And he didn't know what to say. Did she look fat in this? I don't, he just kind of bumbled along. But he didn't understand. It's important that you love me like I am. Now, the reason it's important for that is because I don't love myself. And I don't believe I loved Peter, really. I needed him, but I don't think you're capable of loving somebody if you don't love yourself. I mean, what is it that I give? I don't think, as much as I thought I was Mother Superior, I didn't have anything real to give to those children because I didn't love myself. What they were was an example of what I wanted it to be. They were smart, they were cute, they were capable of doing stuff, they would entertain for me, they all could sing, they could recite poetry, and I said, come on, it's like training dogs. Show what you can do, and they get up and sing and dance, And then they got growing up and they stopped doing that. They wouldn't sing for me or dance or entertain my friends. They just started being who they were. And this is about the time I had to take David to that psychiatrist because David was having a hard time, So looking at me said I had to look at all that stuff before. And what I made a decision was that as soon as I got myself together, I was going to leave the marriage. Little did I know, Peter had told his sponsor as soon as he got himself together, and he was waiting for the youngest child to be 18 because he didn't want to abandon his family like his father had abandoned him. He was going to leave the marriage. And so what we did, we lived in that house, never separated. We lived in that house, and I started working my program. And he started working his program. And I found out through another program that I was allergic to white flour and sugar. And I stopped eating the white flour and sugar. And all at once, I looked up, and here were these steps on this wall. And my sponsor said, are you going to ever work those steps? And I said, I work them every day for Peter. She said, are you going to ever work them for yourself? And I said, oh, for me. My idea was that you fix everybody else and then you put the mask on yourself, And it's like on the plane when they say, first put the mask on yourself and then do what you can for them. But I was so full of guilt because I hadn't been Mother Superior to these children. But I started working on myself, and I realized how powerless I was. Not only over them, I was powerless over me, over places, over situations, over what our life had become, over what our life had not become. I was just powerless, but I wasn't helpless. I found out in these rooms that there was a power that was so powerful and so gracious and so awesome that even though I didn't think much of myself, that this power loved me as if I was the only person in the world. But not only did he love me, he also loved Peter. And not only did he love Peter, he also loved my children. And not only did he love my children, he also loved all of us. And he wanted me better. And that I had to surrender to this program and look at my life as it was and see what God could do. That's when the miracles began to begin. I was willing to call somebody. And I talked the first 12-4 step I did it with an Episcopal priest. And it was so cute. He was so happy I was doing this. He kept hurrying this through. He said, well, did he marry you? Did he marry you? I said, wait, there's more coming, you know. But he was so anxious that my life work out, you know. And I thought he was going to get up at some point because I had had some years between the time I got pregnant with with little David, with my first son, George, and the time I married. I had some years when I was promiscuous, you know, and I wasn't pleased with that behavior. I thought that made me just terrible. I listen to 4 steps now, and a lot of the stuff I did, you know, people don't even pay any attention to that. But I wanted to be perfect, you know, and I realized I wasn't. I did some things that I'm very much ashamed of. But I told him about it, and he loved me anyhow. And I have told more people over and over, and young women, my experience, my story, my pain, my difference, and things that had to change in me. Forget about Peter. What had to change in me? You know? And then I got to that 5th and 6th step. The 5th step, revealing, was important. The 6th step was like taking the 1st step over again, because what I realized was that I also had a lot of character defects, self-pity, resentment, anger, you know. Jealousy. I was so jealous. I would watch Peter all the time to see who he was talking to, how long he talked to them, if they got too close, if he was, maybe had he been intimate with somebody other than me. It was a hard job. It really was a lot of work. And by this time, he was directing this HMO, and he was entertaining his staff. And he said to me, he said, Dawn, I am entertaining the staff, and I want you to be there. And I was pretty much working my program then. I'd lost a little weight. I was, you know, probably still size 20, but I was doing better than it was when I was at 22 and a half. And I was standing there in the front shaking hands with the people, and this lady came up. He said, I hired a secretary. And I said, oh, that's nice. Oh, she's old. You know, and he said, yes, she's an older woman. And I said, well, that's good. And this woman came down the corridor, and she came up to me, and she had this little mini skirt on. And she said, Mrs. Crawford, I'm your husband's new secretary. And I said, no, you're not. And he said it was an older woman. And Peter was across the room, and you should have seen Peter was rushing over there, taking my hand, and he was taking me out of the... He said, she didn't look like that when I hired her. She didn't look like that when I hired her. And all the way home, I'm complaining. How dare you embarrass me like that? How dare... And he said, does this have anything to do with your self-esteem? And I said, how dare you say that to me? And I went in the house, and I called my sponsor. I said, I want to tell you what he said to me on the way home. He asked me if this had anything to do with my self-esteem. And she said, does it? And I hung up on her. You know. What was she talking about, you know? And I'm at this 7th step now, and I'm getting on my knees, and I'm saying, God, this seems to be interfering a bit with my life. I can't seem to get on with my life because I'm so busy watching him. I can't do anything about it. I am powerless over these emotions, and I'm powerless over this jealousy. And I remember getting on my knees and weeping. And a couple of weeks later, we were at a retreat, and Peter was over in the corner standing, talking to some young women. Women have always liked Peter. He's a very handsome man. And I looked over there, and I didn't feel anything but love for Peter. You know, now that's a miracle. You know, and it dawned upon me, if God could lift that jealousy, God could take away my compulsion to overeat. God could take away that self-pity. God could take away that low self-esteem and let me do esteemable things. God could help me to understand that even in my distress, whether I was fat or thin or indifferent, whatever I was, God loved me and he wanted the best for me. And I felt free. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't want to creep once, back, but I could never take a bite of it any more than I can take a bite of a cake. You know what I mean? I can't take a bite of self-pity. I can't take a bite of jealousy. I would have to immediately say, bless him, Lord. I release him. And I noticed that something happened in that house. We were doing something one day. I don't know. My husband was totally incapable of fixing anything, but he always volunteered. I mean, I've seen him break toilets in half. I've seen him break windows. I've seen him do all kinds of stuff. And we would all just bet to see how long it's going to take Daddy to mess this up, And he was doing something, and I looked over, and I fell in love with Peter Crawford, I watched him sitting there, trying to do the best he could. I would hear him on the phone talking with his sponsor. I'd hear him on the phone talking to a sponsor. And I realized what a gentle, loving man he's become, And my amends to him was getting off his back and just loving him unconditionally. He couldn't help it that he was born handsome. I mean, he really couldn't. He couldn't help it that women loved him. What he could do was curb his behavior. And we teach people how to treat us. And when he realized that was unacceptable to me, that you don't treat people that way, he began to change completely. Now, I've often said, and the kids laugh, and they say, well, I'm glad you and Daddy stayed together. But I sometimes wonder what damage we did staying together. But by the same token, I would have missed the last 30 years of our life together, which was one of great beauty and joy, And Peter could make me laugh when nobody else could. He was just, he was my best friend. And so I'm glad I had that experience with him. Then I started trying to make amends to those children because I damaged my children. And I remember when the oldest child came with her problems, and I said, "This is it. I'm going to be Mother Superior. This is my opportunity. I'm always trying to be better than I am. I was going to really, really get this kid together. She came up and she said, Mama, there's something you ought to know about me. And I said, I'm ready. I thought she was going to say I'm pregnant. And I'm going to say, it's okay, I will rear the child. I will be wonderful to you. And she said, I'm gay. I said, no, you're not. Not in my house are you gay. So I lost Lisa for a little while. She left home, and I didn't know where she was. She lived in Philadelphia for a while, and she lived in San Francisco, and she'd get a call from different places around the country, and I didn't know what to do. I'd pick up the phone, and she'd be weeping on one side, and I'd be weeping on the other side. And then one day she called, and she said, Mama, I need to come home. I'm suffering from the disease of alcoholism, and I need to bring my partner with me. And my sponsor had me reading page 449 of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous every day. And I'd been reading that for years. And I could say, come on home, Lisa, and bring your friend, And they came home in July of 1982, and they both went to meetings. And they got sober living in our family room. Now, by this time, Peter, we'd come to the Washington area for him to work on the Carter administration health care plan. And what happened was Carter didn't have a health care plan. So he lost his job. We lost our home. All that we had built up, we lost everything we had. We ended up on food stamps. And what happened, which is the miracle of this program, our programs got richer. We lost things and gained something internally. We just we were on food stamps, and we didn't know what to do on food stamps. Nobody in my family had been on food stamps. And I remember going to the store with my stepmother, and trying to hide to pay for something with the food stamps, this kind of shame thing. Then I remember the 6th and 7th step, powerless, don't have the big house anymore, don't have the big cars anymore. But you know what? We had a sense of peace in our lives, And Lisa came home to that little townhouse in Reston, Virginia, and in July she celebrates 29 years of sobriety in these rooms, And about 10 years ago, she called me, and she said, "Mama, I want you to come to Washington, and I need to share with you." And I got to Washington, and she said, "Mama, I'm getting married." And I said, "Well, that's nice. You and Nancy have been together for almost 20 years. And I said, "This is really wonderful." She said, "No, I'm marrying a man." Now here's the problem. I have become the gay mother of the year. I'm marching in rallies, I'm going up and down carrying the banners and so forth, and she's going to marry a man. So I had to call my sponsor. I'm speaking at the gay conferences, I don't know what to do. And my sponsor said, "Mind your business. You're not in that story." And so I opened my arms and welcomed Lisa and Stephen into my heart. What do I know? The longer I'm in this program, the more I realize, what do I know? Then I remember Mama used to say, "I hope you have a child that's just like you." Well, I got Alma. Alma was, from the time she was little, I remember hitting her on her butt, and she said, "A big lady like you has to hit a little girl like me. Couldn't you work out something different?" She was a character. I remember one time Lisa was gifted singing, and Alma couldn't understand why people were clapping and standing for Lisa. And so Alma must have been about 3, and she ran down the church quarter to quarter and mooned the congregation. She's always been gifted in special ways. Couldn't get out of that diaper, but she could pull it down to moon the congregation, And then she started going. I mean, she was just. I remember going away to school, and she said she was very brilliant. Before she went away to school, she got a job as a waitress. Oh my God, it was just fascinating because Alma never cleared the table at home, But Peter and I said, my sponsor said, support her in what she does. So we went to the restaurant, and I've never seen anybody like that. Man at the table next to me said, "I have never seen such a terrible waitress in my life." And I didn't even tell him that she was my daughter. I mean, I just gave her this unconditional love, like, "Oh, thank you so much, Alma," And I said, "I don't think this is what I ordered." She said, "Eat it." She was a trial to rear. I used to do a 4-step on Alma at least every 4 months, And the thing about her was she was so much like me, And once I started feeling better about me, I could see the good in her. Isn't that interesting? And I watched her go away to seminary, and I watched her standing at a corner in Washington, D.C., coming home from church one Sunday. And I didn't see this. She called a man who put a knife in Alma's neck and dragged her in the alley and raped my baby. And because of people like you, I could go to Alma and hold her and tell her she didn't do anything wrong. She didn't have to carry that guilt like I carried. That door slammed one time when they took my baby. I slammed it 1,000 times. I learned in this program that you don't have to keep repeating over and over and over and over again situations that happen in your life. You let them go, and you let God in. As long as I held on to that rage and that anger at that man, I was in prison. Not him, I've watched Alma be ordained in the United Church of Christ, and I've sat at her feet as she pastors. And my children are a joy to me. I watch Lisa grow in the program. Peter said if she doesn't go back to college, she'll never become anything. She's a vice president at one of your Fortune 100 corporations in America. Just brilliant young woman. You know, I didn't have anything to do with that. But what I did do was mind my business and give them unconditional love, and let's see what the journey would be. Right now, Alma's going through a crisis at home. And she was pastoring a church in Pittsburgh, and a lot of stuff happened there. And she came home broken about 2 months ago. And she said, I know where I can come, where I can get some unconditional love. But she also said, I know where I can come, that I can't stay forever. I mean, is that not good news? Right? So right now, she and I are living together, and it's really interesting. You know, she doesn't clear the table like I do. She doesn't put away things like I do. She doesn't hang off clothes like I do. I don't care, because I talk to my sponsor every day. It's another opportunity for my growth, you know. About 20 years ago, we were sitting at my sister's table, and she said, you know, she said, there's something I need to tell you. She said, you know, some 50, then it was only some 30 years ago, when that boy was taken out of your arms, we adopted him. And I was united with my firstborn, you know. What a gift. I didn't need him anymore. I didn't need him anymore. The hole had been filled in these rooms by the God of my understanding. And he could come back into my life, and he's very much a part of my life. You know, he comes to see me often, and we have a great relationship, and I have 2 wonderful grandchildren. And then God gave me the gift of some 45 years ago, our youngest child was born. I always knew David was a little bit different. Now, here's why I knew he was a little different. When he was 2 years old, most guys are playing with cars and stuff like that. David said he wanted to be the flying nun. Then he wanted to be I Dream of Jeannie. And I'd say, no, son, you want to be a fireman or a preacher like Grandpa, or you want to be a doctor, or you want to be... David said, I'm going to be the flying nun. So I took David to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist talked with David. She said, David's all right when you talk to his parents. You know, David is who David is, you know. And I watched David grow. And there was a point where we had to put David in the hospital because he was in junior high, and some kids put the sign on his back and said, faggot. And David was just so hurt, because he didn't want to be called names. And he tried to kill himself. And we put him in the hospital, and we watched David get better. It was a slow journey. And then one day he said, Mama, you don't have to worry about me anymore. He said, I'm going to wait and see what the end will be. And we watched him grow and become the man God intended him to be all along. And then 14 years ago, he sat down with me and told me he was HIV positive. And 13 years ago, on June the 16th, I sat by his bed. And here's what he said. He said, Mama, if I could have loved anybody half as much as you love me, it would have been enough. And he said, I'm so grateful for these rooms, because I learned in these 12-step programs how to work things out with my dad. And he and his father used to go out every Wednesday, and they would talk about life on life's terms. And he said to his sisters, I'm so grateful. You all have always supported me no matter what. And then the doctor said to me, he can make it for another couple of days, but if we increase the morphine, he's going tonight. And I said to David, here's what the doctor said. And David said, if God loves me, he's not going to leave me in this pain. Please, Mama, let them increase the morphine. And so my sister, my daughter, and I prayed together, because we were the ones who were to make the decision. And we said, increase the morphine. And I sang to him that night, "Sleep, little one, sleep, thy mother's watch shall keep." And I held him while he said his last goodbye and took his last breath. And God took David home. Here's the good news. God took David home, but I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I will see him again, And when I've spoken at gay conferences, I'll close my eyes and some of these young men will have that cologne on and I'll say, "Oh, I get a whiff of David tonight. I get to hold David tonight, Thank you for being there. Thank you so much, God, for this experience, And about 10 years ago, Peter's began to fail. He had emphysema. And we got to the hospice. I took care of his home as long as I could. And at the hospice, we got to the door, and Peter said, "Stop." And I said, "What is it, honey?" He said, "Look over there in the corner." He said, "Do you see him, Dawn?" I said, "Who, honey?" He said, "There's David. He's come to get me." I serve an extravagant God. And it's a God I would never have found had I not come into these rooms. What other kind of God would put Peter in that hospice and David standing in the corner and Peter filled with this joy that his son was going to come and take him home? And we all stood around Peter's bed and celebrated 45 years of sobriety. And we celebrated the joy of his recovery. And we talked about the fact that we would not change a day of our life. We wouldn't live it over either. But we wouldn't change a day of our life, because look what God had done. He had taken broken people and helped them stand on their feet. He could make us laugh over things that nobody else would think was funny. I mean, he just did so many things for Peter and I. And what he did most of all, he helped us love one another with all our brokenness. And that night, Lisa sang, "Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, God's hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness to me." And I was holding his hand. And he went on to glory. Now, I am counting on the fact, I had an accident in January. I fell. I was standing up on a stool trying to get something off a shelf, and I fell, and I broke 9 ribs, punctured my lung. My lungs filled with blood. I couldn't move. I was living because I had to try to figure a way to get from the kitchen to the phone. And I just prayed and kept moving. And when I got to the phone, I pushed in my neighbor downstairs, and they rushed up and they rushed me to the hospital, and they thought they were going to lose me. But I didn't feel any badness because I knew that if I was going, Peter and David would be there to get me, And my other children were saying, "Don't go yet, Mama. We're not ready for you to go yet. You got to fight to live." And I'm saying, "Oh, don't you understand? The journey's been hard, and it's going to really be hard trying to come back from this thing." And they said, "You're going to be walking bent over like this, You'll be an old lady by then." I said, "Okay, I'm coming back. I'm coming back." And you know what? I'm back. I'm standing up here in front of you. I'm standing up here telling you that God can do all things with broken people. I'm telling you that we come in these rooms with so little hope. We come in these rooms so fresh and new and afraid. I live with self-centered fear. We come here thinking we'll never get better, or we'll think he won't do this or she won't do that, or none of us will do that. We have families that are fractured, and we think there's no hope. And then we come here and we hear somebody like Jack talk last night, or we hear Paul talk, we're going to hear Beth talk, Karen's going to talk. You'll hear the joy, and we'll sit in meetings and we'll hear people talk about, if I live by these steps, if I live by these traditions, if I'm willing to be changed, I can't do it. I can't fix broken people, but God can. And he wants to. And he wants you to leave these rooms with hope that it will be better. There's a story of the man who sat by the roadside. He laid there by the roadside. And there's line in the big book says, some of us have picked up our beds and walked. And that line comes from the scriptures where the man was at the roadside for 38 years, waiting to get up and go in the pond, but oh no, it's like, sound like me going to Al-Anon all those 15 years trying to fix him. So, well, when are you going to do something about it? Not yet. I haven't finished fixing them yet, And the man's sitting by the pool, and, I thought about here's the good news. There is a God, and God never thinks he's me. I get confused at times. Okay, so this man's laying by the roadside. Now, if I were God, I would have said, hey, buddy, just get on, you can walk, I'd touch him and he'd be made whole. I would do something. I want something dramatic. I want everybody to see what I'm doing, too, when I'm doing the process of going on. But the master asked the question, do you want to be well? And he had another, probably another excuse like me. Yeah, but not yet, because I haven't finished doing. He said, do you want to be well? And that's the question we ask in these rooms. Do you want to be well? And I don't know what his answer finally was, but the master said, when he finally answered in the affirmative, yes, he said, then pick up your bed and walk. The challenge for us is to pick up these steps. The challenge for us is to say, Lord, I am worthy because you made me. Pick up your bed and walk. God bless you.